Welcome back to The Passport Christian, where I provide you with social commentary on traveling abroad and dating abroad from a Christian perspective.
Subscribe now. 请订阅.
So today I want to talk about China, specifically living there, just the way the Christian culture is, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions. And just to introduce the topic a little bit, the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party, doesn't really like Christians. And I'm going to try to explain a little bit about why that is and give you some different perspectives here. I'm going to use a very good video that I found and kind of compare and contrast some of my experiences living and working. To introduce myself, I was an English teacher for 3.5 years in China. I also have my bachelor's degree in political science, even though I didn't really do anything with that after school. But while I was teaching in China, I also obtained my postgraduate certificate of education. So now I basically have a bachelor's degree in education as well as political science. So I kind of want to analyze a little bit about why Christians, sometimes they might be perceived as being persecuted, and I think that's true to an extent, but we need to keep in mind what it's actually like for a regular person, especially if you're thinking about going there. You don't want to have the wrong ideas and like kind of get nosy asking people about it. So hopefully you can learn a little bit from this video. So stick around. We're going to learn a little bit about just how Christianity is perceived in public, as well as some of the places you can actually go to church in China. So let's get into the first clip, and we're going to respond to it, a few of these points as we go along.
In China, anytime I hear any of these videos of the underground church in China, I question whether I'm even a Christian. I'm just like, they're so radical. We're so complacent and lukewarm in the West.
That's a good thing to point out just at the beginning of this, which is that our approach to Christianity is completely different. Especially in countries where Christianity isn't a big thing, like in Asia, for example. China actually has a fairly large Christian population. There's 32 million of them, but they only make up 2.3% approximately of the population. So the chances of actually running into a Christian are not very high, as it turns out. But anyway, I would like to hear a little bit about this pastor's experience going to teach church leaders in China.
Let me finish with this story. We go to China from time to time, and we train leaders. And this time we brought up 22 leaders from the Hunan province, and they rode 13 hours on a train to get to a hotel that they came up 2 by 2 in these elevators so as to not draw any attention. And then they got to a hotel room, a little apartment room. It's only about 700 square feet. In the little living room, no air conditioning, hardwood floor, 22 sat there. I came in, and when you teach in China, you start at 8 in the morning, and you don't get done till 5 at night.
Sorry, I'm having a little hard time reacting to this. Yeah, that's one thing. They take their teaching very seriously. I know this because I was a teacher. And yeah, definitely, we were asked a lot from our time, and sometimes we would even be required, because we were salaried, we would often be asked to stay overtimes just so they could kind of squeeze as much out of us as possible. And we didn't get paid extra if we had to stay at a meeting after school, like a team building sort of experience or whatever. They would do that a lot, and you didn't want to say no to those kinds of things. That's looked down upon, even as a foreigner. They would kind of pressure you into it. But he's talking about the kind of secrecy that they have around Christianity, and I can definitely understand that from a pastor's perspective. But but just as a normal person walking around, it's a little bit different because they were trying to stay hidden, obviously, because they were going up 2 by 2 in these elevators, so as not to draw any attention. The thing about this is the CCP doesn't like Christianity. They don't like it being spread, I should say. So if you are an evangelist or you are trying to spread Christianity in China, you will probably get noticed, and they can't. And anything the CCP doesn't like, it's a very authoritarian regime. They will find out about it, and they will probably try to stop it. A lot of these guys, they can spend 3 years in prison for trying to do this. The foreigners, if you're a foreigner in China, you'll probably get deported. And that kind of brings up another point, which is, as a foreigner in China, just a regular person, if you have a job there, you serve a particular purpose. You are helping somebody's business, a Chinese person's business. And oftentimes, I mean, Christianity in China isn't very widespread. So a lot of the same ideals that we have, like the Bible, it talks about treating the foreigner with respect and fairness in court, and that doesn't really exist in their society. You do get screwed over a lot if they can do something that benefits their business and kind of screws you over at the same time. They won't hesitate to do that. But at the same time, it's not like it's illegal to be a Christian in China, and that's one of the big misconceptions I kind of wanted to talk about in this video, which is that just existing as a Christian in China, you are allowed to do that. That's, they can't do anything about it, or they won't do anything about it, I should say, because even though it is an authoritarian society, they will have, and I would sometimes go to these churches in China that were state-sponsored, and they would teach only the approved messages in the church. And, you could kind of mingle with other Christians, but access, of course, to the outside was very controlled. You generally don't do it outside of church doors. But if you wanted to get deeper into the real faith, instead of just, what they allow you to present, or what the Chinese government allows to be presented in church, you have to go to an underground church, which is kind of what they were doing here, except it's not as dangerous. So, I had a couple of friends. One of my friends in China, he was actually from Chicago, and something interesting about this guy, he kind of acted different. He was an English teacher, but also a consultant who helped other English teachers find jobs, and he had contacts with all these different schools. But anyway, he also sometimes ran these charities, and I had other friends in China who were also Chinese, and we would talk about our faith occasionally. Like, it's not a big deal if you want to share things with your friends privately in China. It just doesn't go outside. You can't open it up to the public, which is one of the big reasons that people don't carry around cameras or do vlogging a lot, like out on the street. You don't see people doing street interviews a lot in China, unless it's like something about dating, which doesn't really affect the CCP. But the CCP just doesn't like Christianity being spread. So if they see you with a camera, especially, and you have some kind of especially if you have a following online, they're not going to like it. And most people are very cautious about that. Chinese and foreigners alike, just walking around on the street. There are no cameras, usually, unless it's one of the government's cameras, basically. Anyway, I want to kind of get that point across, but let's move on to the next point, which I thought was very insightful about this.
In other
Group
countries.
leaders, underground church leaders in the Hunan province. I said, how many, if you counted up all the people under your jurisdiction, how many would it be? And they counted them up, and they said, little over 20 million.
Wow.
I said, what? See, we forget there's 1.3 billion people in China. This is crazy. Well, I had 15 Bibles, and I passed them out. Obviously, 7 didn't get them. And I said, let's turn to 2 Peter chapter 1, and we're going to read it. And just then, one lady handed hers to somebody next to her. And I thought, interesting. Well, we turned there anyway, and as we started reading it, I understood why she gave it away. She had memorized the whole thing. She just recited the whole chapter.
Wow.
When it was done.
Yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind. It's still a lot of people because it's China. And, even though they're only 2.3% of the population, it still ends up being a pretty large amount of people. But yeah, this is something that is very prevalent in Chinese society, especially in schools. Like, I was a teacher. They're very reliant on rote memorization, which is an actual skill. It's very different from in the West, where we are taught to kind of think outside the box and be entrepreneurial in our thinking, and just find new solutions. In China, they just memorize the facts. Oftentimes, that's what it comes down to. And, there's nothing wrong with that. They get really good at that. And, obviously, if they don't have Bibles, they're going to need to keep this in their head, because how else are you going to know? So it's one thing to keep in mind just the struggles they go through to keep spreading the faith, basically, and taking on all this risk, which we normally wouldn't do in China. And as a regular person just on the street, like, I've attended these underground churches, and even though it was more risky than going to the kind of state-sponsored or state-approved churches, if you wanted to really get into the message of the gospel and learn a little bit, more in depth and get to the real how people really feel about it, you need to go to the underground churches in China. And it's a little bit risky because they can shut these things down, of course. Usually it would be in somebody's apartment, but sometimes not. Sometimes it would literally be in an underground auditorium. I remember going into these passages, and the access to this place was kind of controlled. Not just anybody could walk in, but we would go in and there would be an actual stage and, some pews set up. And, it's just a more real experience of the Christian faith in China. And although it can be dangerous for people, usually it's only dangerous if they're spreading it in public, which is something you really don't want to be caught doing. Like this guy, who's a pastor, obviously that's very dangerous, and he knows it, so he's taking on this risk. And, very, good for him. I didn't do that. I was just a normal guy, but I do think that we're meant to take on risks in our lives. So, God put us on this earth for a reason, and it's to do something with our lives, something meaningful, basically. And that's what I kind of hope to do with this channel a little bit. So I hope you're learning a little bit from this. Anyway, let's move on to the next section.
And when it was done, I said, how can I pray for you? I'm going to go back to America, and you guys have been just so wonderful. How can I pray for you? They said, Wayne, you guys can gather like this whenever you want to in America. We can't. Could you pray that one day we'll be just like you? And I looked at him and I said, I will not do that.
Wow. Oh. They said, pray for us to have the privilege you have. And he says, I won't do that. I won't do that. Oh,
Yep.
Man, that's heavy.
big, incredulous eyes looked at me, and they said, well, why? I said, because you guys rode a train for 13 hours to get here. In my country, if you've got to drive more than an hour, people don't come. You sat on a wooden floor for 3 days. In my country, if people have to sit more than 40 minutes, they leave.
Yeah, this brings me to, one of the memories of some of the things I did while I was in China with my friends. I there were only a few of them, but I had some Christian Chinese friends, Chinese people who were actually Christians. And one of them was just this guy. He would put together these weekend groups. We would go. It was called Outdoor English Corner, and we would basically go together, foreigners and Chinese people, and we would speak English together. And that way, they would be able to conversate in English and improve their English, hopefully. But he was a Christian, this guy who organized these groups, and I remembered sometimes on these groups we would go on these tour buses to these interesting locations, to do hiking and stuff like that, which I really enjoyed. But sometimes we would sing songs on the buses on the way over there. That was really, it was a really fun time all around. Just everything we did was awesome. But sometimes he would sing church hymns on the bus, and I was like, that's a little strange. That's really forward, for me, to do that in front of a group of strange people, because they're all Chinese, but he's singing church hymns, and that's a little taboo, but it kind of got me thinking, maybe that's his way of getting the message out there a little bit, and kind of relating to these people that he is Christian, even though he can't get up there and just preach to them. Singing a song, I guess, is not that big a deal, right? I thought that was really cool. And we would go on to these little trips sometimes to orphanages and places like that. I had a lot of friends who did these really amazing things for people, and I major respect to all of them. And, sometimes I would attend these events, and it's not always fun, these things. It's a little bit of the American in me that expects that, but we have to keep in mind that doing meaningful things, it's not always fun. And we would go to these orphanages, and just being around people who are not always well dressed and prim and proper and always speak perfectly and do everything right. And they always know they have their stuff together, basically. We went to these orphanages and we saw these kids with sometimes birth defects eating gruel, and we would play with them, and it just brings a light to their eyes, and it was a really touching thing. And, even though there wasn't much we could really do, it was just, it's hard to explain, but it was worth doing. I'm trying to say, And as Christians, we are called to do that, I believe. And we have all of this privilege, and our churches are often they attract a wide audience of people by being very entertaining, and they do all these, it's very gimmicky. They do all these things, very showy. It's run basically like just another company. And they're just trying to increase their numbers, their profits, by attracting more of an audience. And, I have nothing against capitalism per se, but it's just kind of a different way of doing it than China, where they control access to information, or real information, I should say. And, they don't want people to investigate too deeply. And it's for different reasons, I feel. in China than it is in the USA, because neither government, and I'm talking about governments in general, they don't want people to hold any authority over them. So if they believe in God, it's particularly dangerous to an authoritarian government because it undermines their authority when people can actually refer to an authority above all men, and that's basically what government is. It's a group of men, usually. Sometimes women, because now in the modern day and age, we have women in government too. But they want to suppress that, basically. And that happens all over the world. It's not just China. So are you going to get in trouble as a foreigner in China being a Christian? Probably not. And I want to stress that you're protected in China because a lot of these companies, they want to use you as a resource, basically, to teach their kids English and, stuff like that. Or maybe you could be, like they literally have white monkey jobs where you can be hired just to be the face of a company, even though you don't actually do anything productive for that company, except to basically be shown to other Chinese people, and basically that company increases their status by employing a foreigner. It's comical sometimes, but that's basically how it works. It's all about perception, and the same thing happens on a government level. They worry about how China in general is perceived in the world, and this is just another way of controlling that. They don't want Christianity to be spread so that nobody can hold an authority over them, and that's basically why it's just a different feeling on the ground in China. Like, people just feel a bit more hopeless because they know they can't do anything about the government, and they can't change the system. Like in America, we have this false sense that, I think it's false, but it's a sense that we can kind of change or influence the government in some way by voting or doing whatever. And like, it really, when it comes down to it, really, we don't have a lot of say in this kind of stuff. It's it's not about politics. I don't talk about politics really. And that's one of the reasons, because I know what it's like in these foreign societies. Chinese people don't talk about politics, and I would encourage you, if you go to China, not to talk about things like Taiwan and Japan and Christianity in general. You can talk about your Christian faith to your friends, but just don't spread it around in public. So that was my experience in China. I hope that you have learned something from this. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, obviously. But always trust in God and try to do meaningful things with your life. Get out there, do what makes your life meaningful, and do things that are not so easy or require you to do hard things in order to accomplish something, both in your faith and just as a normal person. So thank you for watching. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe, and hit the bell icon on the subscribe button. And I'll see you guys later. Thank you.